Welcome back. In this session, we will prepare the project data for upcoming sessions. Now that you've done 2 transformations within Dataflow and we've looked at a vast number of transformation actions within Dataflow, I hope you become familiar with data flows and the rest of the transformations required for this project. We'll be doing them in Azure Databricks and Spark. As you've seen, the data flow executes the transformations in Spark, and Spark works on distributed computing similar to Azure Databricks as well. So in order to work with those technologies, we need to have our data written to folders as opposed to files. If you remember, when we wrote the data using Spark and processed, we had the data written returned to folders as opposed to the files. So in order for Azure Databricks to work, we need to have all our data in folders as opposed to in separate files here, because every table within Azure Databricks points to a folder as opposed to a file. So we need to make some changes to our existing data flows and the pipeline so that the data is written into separate folders. For example, cases and deaths.csv would be returned to cases and deaths folder, and that contains one file with this name. And similarly, we want to do these two as well. So let's switch back to Data Factory and make those changes we need to make. So let's start with the raw files. So they are the raw files that are returned to the ECDC folder, because we're going to work on some of those. So for those ones, if you remember, we had the ECDC file list, which contained JSON config file, and that's what was driving the processing. So let's open that one up, and if you switch over to Data Storage Explorer again, and we had that config file within our blob container under configs. So this is the file which helped us get the data from the ECDC portal into our storage account. So let's open this one up, and so this is the file. So that's got the source URL and the source relative URL and then the sync file name. So what we'll do is we'll add the folder name at the beginning of this. So let me carry on doing that for the rest of the files as well. Okay, that's done. So once we deploy this config file where the pipeline runs, what will happen is that it'll write the data to the folders as opposed to the direct files themselves. So I've just uploaded the data to the storage accounts, so let's switch over to Data Factory and rerun our trigger that has been bringing the data for us. If you remember, that's the PL ingest all ECDC data. So I'm going to click on that one to rerun using debug. So if I click debug that one, it should write the data to the folders as opposed to the files, so let's do that. That execution's now completed, so now let's switch to the Storage Explorer and have a look. So we are in a raw folder, and ECDC we should see the folders. We got the folders here, so let's delete this data, so we don't need them anymore, because all our data is going to be written to these folders going forward. So I'm going to delete that, and we don't need this file anymore because we've completed all the testing, and let's go into one of these folders and make sure the data is correct. So that's there, which is brilliant. So now that we made those changes, we need to make sure that the sources for those are changed as well. So the source is this one for one of our data flows. So now we got ECDC, and under that we got the ECDC, cases and deaths folder, and similarly for hospital admissions, we have got a hospital admissions folder as well. So I'm going to copy that and put it there. So that'll fix the data flow that reads the data from these sources. Similarly, we got the lookup tables for country as well as the dim date. So let's move them into folders. We did this manually, so let's do it in the same way. So I'm going to call this one as dim date as the folder name, and I'm going to put this file into the folder. Copy, and then if I go in and paste, and while that's happening I'm going to create the other folder, and I'm going to call this one as dim country, and I'm going to take the copy of this and put it into dim country. And now that both files have been uploaded into these folders, we don't need these separate files anymore, so we can delete those. So let's delete them. Okay, so that's done. So just that we've done those things, we need to make the corresponding changes on this. So we're going to have a separate directory now called dim country, and here we need to add the dim date folder. So those changes will make sure that the transformations work as we previously expected them to work. So let's publish all those changes and click Publish. And let's make sure that our pipelines for the data flows still work and they are writing the data as we expected. So I'm going to execute both of these pipelines now. So I'm going to do a manual trigger of this and click OK, and let's do the same thing for the hospital admissions data. Click on our trigger and trigger now. So let's switch to the monitor, make sure they are running, and yeah, they're both running. They'll take about 6 minutes or so. We'll come back and we'll have a look at the progress then. Okay, so the pipelines have now finished running. They both succeeded. They took about 3 and 4 minutes, and let's switch over to Data Storage Explorer just to make sure that the data has been written. So we should be in the process DC, and we processed the cases and deaths, and we got the data, new data just now, and that's 1.4 meg. And similarly, we got the hospital admissions daily and the weekly data as well. So we've successfully moved all our data into folders rather than having them in separate files so that we can work with Azure Databricks in our forthcoming sessions. I just wanted to make it clear that we made these changes in this lesson just to be able to work with Azure Databricks, and if we did all our work within Dataflow, we didn't have to do those things. So Dataflow uses the datasets within Azure Data Factory, which can point to single files as opposed to folders. So we can work with both within Data Factory, but unfortunately with Azure Databricks you would have to have them within folders so that you can create a table on top of those. So that's why we made those changes, and that's the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.